A phoneme is a basic unit of a language's phonology, which is combined with other phonemes to form meaningful units such as words or morphemes. The phoneme can be described as the smallest contrastive linguistic unit which may bring about a change of meaning. In this way, the difference in meaning between the English words kill and kiss is a result of the exchange of the phoneme for the phoneme. Two words that differ in meaning through a contrast of a single phoneme form a minimal pair. Within linguistics there are differing views as to exactly what phonemes are and how a given language should be analyzed in phonemic terms. However, a phoneme is generally regarded as an abstraction of a set of speech sounds which are perceived as equivalent to each other in a given language. For example, in English, the K sounds in the words kit and skill are not identical, but they are distributional variants of a single phoneme. Different speech sounds that are realizations of the same phoneme are known as allophones. Allophonic variation may be conditioned, in which case a certain phoneme is realized as a certain allophone in particular phonological environments, or it may be free, in which case it may vary randomly. In this way, phonemes are often considered to constitute an abstract underlying representation for segments of words, while speech sounds make up the corresponding phonetic realization, or surface form. Notation: phonemes are conventionally placed between slashes in transcription, whereas speech sounds are placed between square brackets. Thus represents a sequence of three phonemes, while pedigree-florin represents the phonetic sequence of sounds, pedigree, florin. Another similar convention is the use of angle brackets to enclose the units of orthography, namely graphemes. For example, a euro represents the written letter F. The symbols used for particular phonemes are often taken from the International Phonetic Alphabet, the same set of symbols that are most commonly used for phones. However, descriptions of particular languages may use different conventional symbols to represent the phonemes of those languages. For languages whose writing systems employ the phonemic principle, ordinary letters may be used to denote phonemes, although this approach is often hampered by the complexity of the relationship between orthography and pronunciation. Assignment of speech sounds to phonemes. A phoneme is a sound or a group of different sounds perceived to have the same function by speakers of the language or dialect in question. An example is the English phoneme, which occurs in words such as cat, kit, school, skill. Although most native speakers do not notice this, in most English dialects the CK sounds in these words are not identical. In cat and kit the sound is aspirated, while in school and skill it is unaspirated. The words therefore contain different speech sounds, or phones, transcribed, K-degree for the aspirated form, K, for the unaspirated one. These different sounds are nonetheless considered to belong to the same phoneme, because if a speaker used one instead of the other, the meaning of the word would not change. Using the aspirated form, K-degree in skill might sound odd, but the word would still be recognized. By contrast, some other sounds would cause a change in meaning if substituted. For example, substitution of the sound, t, would produce the different word still, and that sound must therefore be considered to represent a different phoneme. The above shows that in English, K and K-degree are allophones of a single phoneme. In some languages, however, K-degree and K are perceived by native speakers as different sounds, and substituting one for the other can change the meaning of a word. This means that in those languages, the two sounds represent different phonemes. For example, in Icelandic, K-degree is the first sound of kartor meaning cheerful, while K is the first sound of gardor meaning riddles. Icelandic therefore has two separate phonemes and minimal pairs. A pair of words like kartor and gardor that differ only in one phone is called a minimal pair for the two alternative phones in question. The existence of minimal pairs is a common test to decide whether two phones represent different phonemes or are allophones of the same phoneme. To take another example, the minimal pair tip and dip illustrates that in English, t and d belong to separate phonemes, and since these two words have different meanings, English speakers must be conscious of the distinction between the two sounds. In other languages, though, including Korean, even though both sounds, t and d, occur, no such minimal pair exists. The lack of minimal pairs distinguishing t and d in Korean provides evidence that in this language they are allophones of a single phoneme. The word is pronounced tada, for example. That is, when they hear this word, Korean speakers perceive the same sound in both the beginning and middle of the word, whereas an English speaker would perceive different sounds in these two locations. However, the absence of minimal pairs for a given pair of phones does not always mean that they belong to the same phoneme. They may be too dissimilar phonetically for it to be likely that speakers perceive them as the same sound. For example, English has no minimal pair for the sounds h and angstrom, and the fact that they can be shown to be in complementary distribution could be used to argue for them being allophones of the same phoneme. However, they are so dissimilar phonetically that they are considered separate phonemes. Phonologists have sometimes had recourse to near minimal pairs to show that speakers of the language perceive two sounds as significantly different even if no exact minimal pair exists in the lexicon. It is virtually impossible to find a minimal pair to distinguish English from, yet it seems uncontroversial to claim that the two consonants are distinct phonemes. The two words pressure and pleasure can serve as a near minimal pair. Other features with phonemic status: while phonemes are normally conceived of as abstractions of discrete segmental speech sounds, there are other features of pronunciation principally tone and stress which in some languages can change the meaning of words in the way that phoneme contrasts do, and are consequently called phonemic features of those languages. Phonemic stress is encountered in languages such as English. For example, the word invite stressed on the second syllable is a verb, but when stressed on the first syllable it becomes a noun. The position of the stress in the word affects the meaning, and therefore a full phonemic specification would include indication of the position of the stress, for the verb, for the noun. In other languages, such as French, word stress cannot have this function and is therefore not phonemic. Phonemic tones are found in languages such as Mandarin Chinese, in which a given syllable can have 5 different tonal pronunciations. For example, the character A means mum, E means hemp, E means horse, E means scold, and A is an interrogative particle. The tone phonemes in such languages are sometimes called tonemes. Languages such as English do not have phonemic tone, although they use intonation for functions such as emphasis and attitude. Distribution of allophones: when a phoneme has more than one allophone, the one actually heard at a given occurrence of that phoneme may be dependent on the phonetic environment. Allophones which normally cannot appear in the same environment are said to be in complementary distribution. In other cases the choice of allophone may be dependent on the individual speaker or other unpredictable factors. Such allophones are said to be in free variation. Background and related ideas: the term phoneme was reportedly first used by A. Dufreich des Genets in 1873, but it referred only to a speech sound. The term phoneme as an abstraction was developed by the Polish linguist Jan Nisisai Bordin de Courtney and his student Mikołaj Krzyzewski during 1875–1895. The term used by these two was phonema, the basic unit of what they called psychophonetics. The concept of the phoneme was then elaborated in the works of Nikolai Trubetskoy and others of the Prague school, and in those of structuralists like Ferdinand de Saussure, Edward Sapir, and Leonard Bloomfield. Some structuralists rejected the idea of a cognitive or psycholinguistic function for the phoneme. Later, it was used and redefined in generative linguistics, most famously by Noam Chomsky and Maurice Halley, and remains central to many accounts of the development of modern phonology. As a theoretical concept or model, though, it has been supplemented and even replaced by others. Some linguists proposed that phonemes may be further decomposable into features, such features being the true minimal constituents of language. Features overlap each other in time, as do suprasegmental phonemes in oral language and many phonemes in sign languages. Features could be characterized in different ways. Jacobson and colleagues defined them in acoustic terms. Chomsky and Halley used a predominantly articulatory basis, though retaining some acoustic features, while Ladefoged's system is a purely articulatory system apart from the use of the acoustic term sibilant. In the description of some languages, the term chroneme has been used to indicate contrastive length or duration of phonemes. In languages in which tones are phonemic, the tone phonemes may be called tonemes. Not all scholars working on such languages use these terms, which may be considered obsolete. By analogy with the phoneme, linguists have proposed other sorts of underlying objects, giving them names with the suffix -eme, such as morpheme and grapheme. These are sometimes called emic units. The latter term was first used by Kenneth Pike, who also generalized the concepts of emic and etic description to applications outside linguistics. Restrictions on occurrence. Languages do not generally allow words or syllables to be built of any arbitrary sequences of phonemes. There are phonotactic restrictions on which sequences of phonemes are possible and in which environments certain phonemes can occur. Phonemes that are significantly limited by such restrictions may be called restricted phonemes. Examples of such restrictions in English include, as in sing, occurs only at the end of a syllable, never at the beginning. Occurs only before vowels and at the beginning of a syllable, never at the end. In many American dialects with a quota-euro-quart merger, occurs only before and. In non-rhotic dialects, can only occur before a vowel, never at the end of a word or before a consonant. And occur only before a vowel, never at the end of a syllable. Some phonotactic restrictions can alternatively be analyzed as cases of neutralization. See neutralization and archive phonemes below, particularly the example of the occurrence of the three English nasals before stops. Uniqueness. Uniqueness is a requirement of classic structuralist phonemics. It means that a given phone, wherever it occurs, must unambiguously be assigned to one and only one phoneme. In other words, the mapping between phones and phonemes is required to be many to one rather than many to many. The notion of uniqueness was controversial among some pre-generative linguists and was prominently challenged by Maurice Halle and Noam Chomsky in the late 1950s and early 1960s. An example of the problems arising from the uniqueness requirement is provided by the phenomenon of flapping in North American English. This may cause either or to be realized with a phone, E3/4. For example, the same flap sound may be heard in the words hitting and bidding, although it is clearly intended to realize the phoneme in the first word and in the second. This appears to contradict uniqueness. For further discussion of such cases, see the next section. Neutralization and archive phonemes. Phonemes that are contrastive in certain environments may not be contrastive in all environments. In the environments where they do not contrast, the contrast is said to be neutralized. In these positions it may become less clear which phoneme a given phone represents. Some phonologists prefer not to specify a unique phoneme in such cases, since to do so would mean providing redundant or even arbitrary information. Instead they use the technique of underspecification. An archive phoneme is an object sometimes used to represent an underspecified phoneme. An example of neutralization is provided by the Russian vowels and. These phonemes are contrasting in stressed syllables, but in unstressed syllables the contrast is lost, since both are reduced to the same sound, usually, e unregistered trademark. In order to assign such an instance of e unregistered trademark to one of the phonemes and, it is necessary to consider morphological factors. In some cases even this may not provide an unambiguous answer. A description using the approach of underspecification would not attempt to assign e unregistered trademark to a specific phoneme in some or all of these cases, although it might be assigned to an archive phoneme, written something like a, which reflects the two neutralized phonemes in this position. A somewhat different example is found in English, with the three nasal phonemes /m, n, angstrom /. In word final position these all contrast, as shown by the minimal triplet sum, sun, sung. However, before a stop such as /p, t, k/, only one of the nasals is possible in any given position, before or, and before, as in limp, lint, link. The nasals are therefore not contrastive in these environments, and according to some theorists this makes it inappropriate to assign the nasal phones heard here to any one of the phonemes. Instead they may analyze these phones as belonging to a single archive phoneme, written something like n, and state the underlying representations of limp, lint, link to be LNP, LNT, LNK. This latter type of analysis is often associated with Nikolai Trubetskoy of the Prague School. Archive phonemes are often notated with a capital letter within pipes, as with the examples A and N given above. Other ways the second of these might be notated include MN angstrom, M, N, angstrom, or N. Another example from English, but this time involving complete phonetic convergences in the Russian example, is the flapping of and in some American English. Here the words betting and bedding might both be pronounced, e.b. a 3/4 e, and if a speaker applies such flapping consistently, it would be necessary to look for morphological evidence in order to determine which phoneme the flap represents. As in the previous examples, some theorists would prefer not to make such a determination, and simply assign the flap in both cases to a single archive phoneme, written D. For a special kind of neutralization proposed in generative phonology, see absolute neutralization. Morphophonemes. A morphophoneme is a theoretical unit at a deeper level of abstraction than traditional phonemes, and is taken to be a unit from which morphemes are built up. A morphophoneme within a morpheme can be expressed in different ways in different allomorphs of that morpheme. For example, the English plural morpheme s appearing in words such as cats and dogs can be considered to consist of a single morphophoneme, which might be written Z or Z, and which is pronounced as S, after most voiceless consonants, and Z, in most other cases. Numbers of phonemes in different languages. A given language will use only a small subset of the many possible sounds that the human speech organs can produce, and the number of distinct phonemes will generally be smaller than the number of identifiably different sounds. Different languages vary considerably in the number of phonemes they have in their systems. The total phonemic inventory in languages varies from as few as 11 in Rotokas and Piraha to as many as 141 in Zach copyright. The number of phonemically distinct vowels can be as low as 2, as in Ubix and Arent. At the other extreme, the Bantu language Ngwe has 14 vowel qualities, 12 of which may occur long or short, making 26 oral vowels, plus 6 nasalized vowels, long and short, making a total of 38 vowels. While Zach Ubdomicron achieves 31 pure vowels, not counting its additional variation by vowel length, by varying the phonation. As regards consonant phonemes, Puinave has just 7, and Rotokas has only 6a. Zach Ubdomicron, on the other hand, has somewhere around 77, and Ubix 81. The English language uses a rather large set of 13 to 21 vowel phonemes, including diphthongs, although its 22 to 26 consonants are close to average. Some languages, such as French, have no phonemic tone or stress, while several of the Kama Euro-Sui languages have 9 tones, and one of the Kra languages, Wob, has been claimed to have 14, though this is disputed. The most common vowel system consists of the 5 vowels. The most common consonants are. Relatively few languages lack any of these consonants, although it does happen. For example, Arabic lacks, Standard Hawaiian lacks, Mohawk and Tlingit lack and Hupa lacks both and a simple, colloquial Samoan lacks and, while Rotokas and Quileute lack and. Correspondence between letters and phonemes. Phonemes are considered to be the basis for alphabetic writing systems. In such systems the written symbols represent, in principle, the phonemes of the language being written. However, because changes in the spoken language are often not accompanied by changes in the established orthography, the correspondence between spelling and pronunciation in a given language may be highly distorted. This is the case with English, for example. The correspondence between symbols and phonemes in alphabetic writing systems is not necessarily a one-to-one correspondence. A phoneme might be represented by a combination of 2 or more letters, like sh in English or sch in German. Also a single letter may represent 2 phonemes, as the Cyrillic letter n in some positions. There may also exist spelling pronunciation rules that further complicate the correspondence of letters to phonemes, although they need not affect the ability to predict the pronunciation from the spelling and vice versa, provided the rules are known. Phonemes in sign languages. In sign languages, The basic elements of gesture and location were formerly called cherems or cherems, but they are now generally referred to as phonemes, as with oral languages. Sign language phonemes are combinations of articulation bundles in ASL. These bundles may be classified as a tab, des, sig, and with some researchers, ori. Facial expression and mouthing are also considered articulation bundles. Just as with spoken languages, when these bundles are combined, they create phonemes. Stokoe notation is no longer used by researchers to denote the phonemes of sign languages. His research, while still considered seminal, has been found to not describe American Sign Language and cannot be used interchangeable with other signed languages. Originally developed for American Sign Language, it has also been applied to British Sign Language by Kyle and Wohl, and to Australian Aboriginal Sign Languages by Adam Kendon. Other sign notations, such as the Hamburg notation system and sign writing, are phonetic scripts capable of writing any sign language. Stokoe's work has been succeeded and improved upon by researchers Scott Liedell in his book Grammar, Gesture and Meaning, and both Stokoe and Liedell's work have been included in the Linguistics of American Sign Language, 5th edition. See also Notes. Bibliography.